Next chapter is Suspended. And we're going to see what's going to happen now. Celia said it needs a caretaker. We know that Bailey has shown up. Let's see how these two different elements of the story are finally going to combine. The last time Bailey entered this particular tent, Poppet was with him, and it was filled with a dense white fog. Then, and Bailey has difficulty believing it was only days ago, the tent had seemed endless. But now, without the cover of mist, Bailey can see the white walls of the tent and all the creatures within it, but none of them are moving. Birds and bats and butterflies hang throughout the space as if held by strings, completely still. No rustling of paper wings, no motion at all. Other creatures sit on the ground near Bailey's feet, including a black cat crouched pre-pounce near a silver-tipped white fox. There are larger animals as well, a zebra with perfectly contrasting stripes, a reclining lion with a snowy mane, a white stag with tall antlers. Standing next to the stag is a man in a dark suit. He is almost transparent, like a ghost or a reflection in glass. Parts of his suit are no more than shadows. Bailey can see the stag clearly through the sleeve of his jacket. Bailey is debating whether or not it is a figment of his imagination when the man looks over at him. His eyes surprisingly bright, though Bailey cannot discern their color. Okay, so Tsukiko, when we saw Bailey with Tsukiko brought Bailey to the tent. Bailey enters the tent without Tsukiko because remember, she said, I'm just the guide. Like, I'm not going with you. I'm just here to bring you where you're supposed to go. But the place she had brought him was the tent that had all the paper animals that could move around. Now, what in the very last paragraph of the last chapter, Celia said that she had suspended the circus. Okay, so the whole circus is on pause right now. This is why all the animals in this tent are all stationary, like they're all paused mid-movement. Okay, and so he walks into the tent and he sees a man. He says the man looks kind of like a ghost. This man is, of course, Marco. And Marco is there waiting for Bailey. He's going to take Bailey over to see Celia so we can see what we're going to do about the rest of the circus. I asked her not to send you this way, he says, though it is the most direct. Who are you? Bailey asks. My name is Marco, the man says. You must be Bailey. Bailey nods. I wish you were not so young, Marco says. Something in his voice sounds profoundly sad, but Bailey is still distracted by his ghost-like appearance. Are you dead? He asks, walking closer. With the changing angle, Marco appears almost solid one moment and transparent again the next. Not precisely, Marco says. Tsukiko said she was the only living person here who knows what had happened. I suspect Miss Tsukiko is not always entirely truthful. You look like a ghost, Bailey says. He can think of no better way to describe it. You appear the same way to me, so which of us is real? Bailey has no idea how to answer that question, so he asks the first one of his own that comes to mind instead. Is that your bowler hat in the courtyard? To his surprise, Marco smiles. It is indeed, he says. I lost it before everything happened, so it got left behind. What happened? Bailey asks. Marco pauses before he answers. That is a rather long story. That's what Tsukiko said, Bailey says. He wonders if he can find Widget so he can do the storytelling properly. She was truthful on that point then, Marco says. Tsukiko intended to imprison me in the bonfire, the reasons for which are a longer story than we have time for, and there was a change of plan that resulted in the current situation. I was pulled apart and put back together again in a less concentrated state. Marco holds out his hand and Bailey reaches to touch it. His fingers move through without stopping, but there is a soft resistance, the impression that there is something occupying the space, even if it is not completely solid. It is not an illusion or a trick, Marco says. Bailey's brow furrows in thought, but after a moment he nods. Poppet said nothing is impossible, and he finds he is beginning to agree. I am not interacting with the surroundings as directly as you are, Marco continues. You and everything here appear equally insubstantial from my perspective. Perhaps we will be able to discuss it at greater length another time. Come with me. He turns and begins walking toward the back of the tent. Bailey follows, taking a winding path around the animals. It is difficult to find places to step, though Marco glides ahead of him with much less difficulty. Bailey loses his balance, stepping around the prone figure of a polar bear. His shoulder knocks into a raven hanging in the air. The raven falls to the ground, its wings bent and broken. Before Bailey can say anything, Marco reaches down and picks up the raven, turning it over in his hands. He moves the broken wings and reaches inside, twisting something with a clicking noise. The raven turns its head and lets out a sharp, metallic caw. How can you touch him? Bailey asks. I'm still figuring out the logistics of interacting with physical things, Marco says, flattening the raven's wings and letting it limp down the length of his arm. It flaps its paper feathers but cannot fly. It likely has something to do with the fact that I made them. Elements of the circus I had a hand in creating seem to be more tangible. Okay, so Bailey asks a good question here. He's like, I don't understand. You can't touch anything else in the circus. Why can you touch the animals in here? And Marco says, well, the things that I created myself, I can touch a little bit easier. Maybe that will come in handy when it comes time to like help keep the circus running. Okay, so he can actually help to fix the things that he's created. The raven hops off by a mountainous pile of paper scales with a curling tail that looks as though it might once have been a dragon. They're amazing, Bailey says. They are paper and clockwork wrapped up in fairly simple charms. You could do the same with a bit of study. It had never crossed Bailey's mind that he could do such things himself, but having been told as much so simply and directly, it seemed strangely achievable. Where are we going? Bailey asks as they approach the far side of the tent. Someone would like to speak with you, Marco says. She's waiting at the wishing tree. It seemed to be the most stable. I don't think I've seen the wishing tree, Bailey says, mindful of each step as they approach the other side of the tent. It is not a tent that's stumbled upon, Marco says. It is found when it is needed instead. It is one of my favorite tents. Okay, so we find out that the wishing tree is actually a lot like the Room of Requirement on Harry Potter, which is that it only pops up when someone needs it. Okay, and maybe that's why Bailey's never seen it yet. Okay. He says, you take a candle from the box at the entrance and light it from one that already burns on the tree. Your wish is ignited by someone else's wish. They have reached the wall of the tent, and Marco indicates a break in the fabric, a barely visible row of ribbon ties that reminds Bailey of the entrance to Widget's tent with all the strange bottles. If you go out here, you will see the entrance to the acrobat tent across the way. I'll be right behind you, though you might not be able to see me until we're inside again. Be careful. Bailey unties the bows and slips out of the tent easily, finding himself in a winding path between tents. The sky above is gray but bright, despite the soft rain that is beginning to fall. The acrobat tent looms higher than the tents surrounding it, and the sign that reads Defiance of Gravity swings over the entrance only a few paces away. Bailey has been in this tent several times. He knows the open floor with the performers hanging above it well. But when he steps through the door, he is not met with wide open space he expects. He walks into a party, a celebration that has been frozen in place, suspended the same way the paper birds had been in the air. There are dozens of performers throughout the tent, bathed with light from glowing round lamps that hang high above amongst ropes and chairs and round cages. Some are standing in groups and pairs, Others sit on pillows and boxes and chairs that add flashes of color to the predominantly black and white crowd. And each figure is perfectly still, so motionless that it seems they are not even breathing, like statues. Okay, so now they're in the acrobat tent, and this is where everyone in the circus has been gathering for the inclement weather party. But what's creepy about it is that the party has been paused, like right where it is. And so all the people are like mid sentence or like mid action, and everyone's just paused like a statue. One near Bailey has a flute at his lips, the instrument silent in his fingers. Another is pouring a bottle of wine, the liquid hovering above the glass. We should have gone around, Marco says, appearing like a shadow by his side. I've been keeping an eye on them for hours, and they haven't got any less disturbing. What's wrong with them? Bailey asks. Nothing, as far as I can tell, Marco answers. The entirety of the circus has been suspended to give us more time, so he lifts a hand and waves it over the party. Tsukiko's part of the circus and she's not like this, Bailey says, confused. I believe Tsukiko plays by her own rules, Marco says. This way, he adds, moving into the crowd of figures. Navigating the party proves more difficult than walking around the paper animals, and Bailey takes every step with extreme caution, afraid of what might happen if he accidentally hit someone the way he knocked down the raven. Almost there, Marco says, as they maneuver their way around a cluster of people grouped in a broken circle. But Bailey stops, staring at the figure the group is facing. Widget wears his performance costume, but his patchwork jacket has been discarded, his vest hanging open over his black shirt. His hands are lifted in the air, gesturing in such a familiar way that Bailey can tell he has been stopped mid-story. Poppet stands next to him. Her head is turned in the direction of the courtyard, as though something pulled her attention away from her brother at the precise moment the party was halted. Her hair spills out behind her, waves of red floating in the air as if she were suspended in water. Okay, so I think one of your questions asks why Poppet might be looking out toward the courtyard. Well, we know that Poppet is able to predict the future ever so slightly, so it's possible that Poppet kind of saw it coming, but before she could do anything, she got paused. Bailey walks around to face her, reaching out tentatively to touch her hair. It ripples beneath his fingers, undulating slowly before settling back into its frozen state. Can she see me? Bailey asks. Papa's eyes are still yet bright. He expects her to blink at any moment, but she does not. I don't know, Marco says. Perhaps, but before he can conclude the thought, one of the chairs hanging above them falls, its ribbon snapping. It comes close to hitting Widget as it crashes to the ground, splintering into pieces. Bloody hell, Marco says, as Bailey jumps back, almost colliding with Poppet and sending her hair into another brief wave of motion. Through there, Marco says, indicating the side of the tent that is some distance away. Then he vanishes. Bailey looks back at Poppet and Widget. Poppet's hair settles again, unmoving. Fragments of the fallen chair rest on Widget's boots. Okay, that is terrifying. The acrobat tent, all of the things that the acrobats would climb on are all suspended from the ceiling with ribbon. And so one of the chairs, the ribbon frays and snaps on it, and the chair falls down, almost hitting Widget and Poppet. Okay, what that should indicate to us is that, like, we're on a time schedule. We got to make this happen because things are starting to go wrong and someone could get hurt. Turning away, Bailey moves carefully around stationary figures to reach the edge of the tent. He casts nervous glances upward at the additional chairs and the round iron cages suspended by nothing but fraying ribbon. His fingers shake as he undoes the ties in the wall. As soon as he passes through, he feels as though he has walked into a dream. Inside the adjoining tent, there is a towering tree, as large as his old oak tree, growing right out of the ground. The branches are bare and black, but they are covered with dripping white candles, translucent layers of wax frosting over the bark. Only a fraction of the candles are burning, but the sight is no less resplendent as they illuminate the twisting black branches, casting dancing shadows over the striped walls. Beneath it, Marco stands with his arms around a woman Bailey recognizes instantly as the illusionist. She appears as transparent as Marco does. Her gown looks like mist in the candlelight. "Hello, Bailey," she says as he approaches. Her voice echoes around him softly, as close as if she were standing next to him, whispering in his ear. "I like your scarf," she adds when he does not immediately reply. The words in his ears are warm and strangely comforting. "I'm Celia. I don't believe we were ever properly introduced." "Nice to meet you," Bailey says. Celia smiles, and Bailey is struck by how different she seems from the way she did when he watched her perform, even beyond the fact that he can look through her at the dark tree branches. "How did you know I was coming here?" he asks. Poppet mentioned you as a part of the series of events that occurred earlier, so I hoped you would arrive eventually. Okay. Bailey keeps being told he's late. He was supposed to arrive earlier. Okay, this is due to the fact that he missed the circus and had to travel all that way. So we don't really know what would have happened if Bailey got here before. But nonetheless, here he is. Let's see what Celia wants from him. At the mention of Poppet's name, Bailey glances over his shoulder at the wall of the tent. The suspended party seems farther away than just beyond the canvas stripes. "We need your help with something," Celia continues as he turns back. "We need you to take over the circus." "What?" Bailey asks. He is not sure what he was expecting, but it was not this. "Right now, the circus is in need of a new caretaker," Marco says. "It is drifting like a ship without an anchor. It needs someone to anchor it." "And that someone is me?" Bailey asks. "We would like it to be, yes," Celia says, "if you are willing to make the commitment. We should be able to assist you, and Poppet and Widget would be able to help as well, but the true responsibility would be yours." "But I'm not special," Bailey says. "Not the way they are. I'm not anyone important." Okay, at this point, we kind of hope that Celia is going to be like, "Yes, you are. You're important. You just didn't know it all of your life, right?" But instead, he says, "I'm not important." And Celia says, "I know. You're not destined or chosen. I wish I could tell you that you were, if that would make it easier, but it's not true. You're in the right place at the right time, and you care enough to do what needs to be done. Sometimes that's enough." As he watches her in the flickering light, it strikes Bailey suddenly that she is a fair deal older than she appears, and that the same is likely true of Marco. It is like realizing someone in a photograph is no longer the same age as they were when it was taken, and they seem farther away because of it. The circus itself feels far away, even though he stands within it, as though it is falling away from him. "All right," Bailey says, but Celia holds up a transparent hand to stop him before he agrees. "Wait," Celia says. "This is important. I want you to have something neither of us truly had. I want you to have a choice. You can agree to this, or you can walk away. You are not obliged to help, and I don't want you to feel that you are." "What happens if I walk away?" Bailey asks. Celia looks at Marco before she answers. They only look at each other without speaking, but the gesture is so intimate that Bailey glances away, looking up at the twisting branches of the tree. "It won't last," Celia says after a moment. She does not elaborate, turning back to Bailey as she continues. "I know this is a great deal to request from you, but I do not have anyone else to ask." Suddenly, the candles on the tree begin to spark. Some of them darken, curls of smoke replacing the bright flames only momentarily before disappearing themselves. Celia wavers, and for a moment Bailey thinks she might faint, but Marco steadies her. "Celia, love," Marco says, running his hand over her hair. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You can hold on for a while longer. I know you can. I'm sorry, Celia says. Okay, so some of the candles on the tree are starting to go out. This is just more indication that they need to hustle it up. I'm sorry, Celia says. Bailey cannot tell which one of them she's speaking to. You have nothing to be sorry about, Marco says. Celia holds tightly to his hand. What would happen if the two of you, what would happen to the two of you if the circus stopped? Bailey asks. Truthfully, I'm not entirely certain, Celia says. Nothing good, Marco mutters. What would you need me to do? Bailey asks. I need you to finish something I started, Celia says. I acted rather impulsively and played my cards out of order, and now there is the matter of the bonfire as well. The bonfire? Bailey asks. Think of the circus as a machine, Marco says. The bonfire is one of the things that powers it. There are two things that need to happen, Celia says. First, the bonfire needs to be lit. That will power half the circus. What about the other half? Bailey asks. That's more complicated, Celia says. I carry that with me, and I would have to give that to you. Oh, you would then carry it with you, Celia says, all of the time. You'd be tied very tightly to the circus itself. You could leave, but not for extended periods of time. I do not know if you would be able to give it to someone else. It would be yours always. Okay, do you remember when Marco said, I wish you were not so young, and how Celia's like trying to make him really think about it? She wants him to realize that like if he accepts this, that the circus is going to be his life forever. Like he's committing his whole life to it. Why do you think he might be willing to do it? We heard them say that Poppet and Widget might be able to help. They would take responsibility for part of the circus as well. It is only then that Bailey realizes the scope of the commitment he is being asked for. It is not the handful of years committed to Harvard. It is, he thinks, an even greater commitment than inheriting responsibility for the family farm. He looks from Marco to Celia and knows from the look in her eyes that she will let him go if he asks to leave, no matter what that might mean for them or for the circus. He thinks of a litany of questions, but none of them truly matter. He knows his answer already. His choice was made when he was 10 years old, under a different tree, bound up in acorns and dares and a single white glove. He will always choose the circus. I'll do it, he says. I'll stay. I'll do whatever it is you need me to do. Thank you, Bailey, Celia says softly. The words resonating in his ears soothe the last of his nerves. Indeed, Marco says. I think we should make it official. Do you think that's absolutely necessary? Celia asks. At this point, I'm not about to settle for a verbal contract, Marco says. Celia frowns for a moment, but then nods her consent, and Marco carefully lets go of her hand. She stays steady, and her appearance does not waver. Do you want me to sign something? Bailey asks. Not exactly, Marco says. He takes a silver ring from his right hand. It is engraved with something Bailey cannot discern in the light. Marco reaches up to a branch above his head and passes the ring through one of the burning candles until it glows white and hot. Bailey wonders whose wish that particular flame might be. I made a wish on this tree years ago, Marco says, as though he knows what Bailey is thinking. What did you wish for? Bailey asks, hoping it is not too forward a question, but Marco does not answer. Instead, he folds the glowing ring into his palm, and then he offers his hand to Bailey. Bailey hesitantly reaches out, expecting his fingers to pass through Marco's hand as easily as they did before. But instead they stop, and Marco's hand in his is almost solid. Marco leans forward and whispers into Bailey's ear, I wished for her, he says. Then Bailey's hand begins to hurt. The pain is bright and hot as the ring burns into his skin. What are you doing? He manages to ask when he can gasp for enough air. The pain is sharp and searing, coursing through his entire body, and he is barely able to keep his knees from buckling beneath him. Binding, Marco says. It's one of my specialties. He releases Bailey's hand. The pain vanishes instantly, but Bailey's legs continue to tremble. Are you all right? Celia asks. Bailey nods, looking down at his palm. The ring is gone, but there is a bright red circle burned into his skin. Bailey is certain, without having to ask, that it will be a scar he carries with him always. He closes his hand and looks back at Marco and Celia. Tell me what I need to do now, he says.